Hi, welcome back to the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast. I'm Lisa Salisbury, and my mission is to help women stop obsessing about everything they eat and feel confident about their ability to lose weight without a diet app. This week, we are actually doing something a little different. I know most of my listeners are women, and they also tend to be moms. My guest today is Jayne Ann Osborne, who is a mom blogger, author, and illustrator, and she has an amazing experience to share with us today about when moms get sick. Although for most of us, this will end up relating to when you have a temporary illness, Jayne Ann was sick every day of all 4 of her pregnancies. Not just a little sick. Just wait. You'll hear about her experience with that and how severe her illness was. You'll hear how she continued to create connection with her family, and we even talk about how connection is made when food is not a part of it. For a lot of my clients, the connection to people around food can be challenging when you decide that you're going to eat a little less or maybe just participate differently in food traditions or outings. So really pay attention to how she talks about connection and curiosity, especially when food was not an option. So although this is definitely an interruption to our regular programming, as they say, I think you're really going to love this conversation. Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for women who want to lose weight but are tired of counting and calculating all the food. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury. I'm a certified health and weight loss coach and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. I'll teach you to figure out why you are eating when you aren't hungry instead of worrying so much about what you are eating. I have Jayne Ann Osborne here with us today. We're so excited. She's an author, illustrator, mom blogger, and is here to talk to us today about what we do when we get sick as moms. So I'm super excited. I'm going to let her do the introduction, though, and how she came to this work.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I am so excited to dive into this conversation. My family and I are from the Salt Lake area, and I've been in the communication and intentional parenting space for about 10 years. It started actually in college. I took a couple of communication classes, and those classes just lit my soul on fire. I could not get enough, and I immediately signed up for every single marriage and family communication class that my university had to offer. And I just loved learning about the brain and personality types and, how different factors combine to deeply impact the most important relationships that we have, which are our family relationships. And that ended up, once I graduated college, I used the things that I learned in those classes as a springboard to continue learning about intentional parenting. So I still study and write about it. And now that I have 4 children, I get to practice every day intentional parenting. And I am also the author and illustrator of a children's book, which is called When Mommies Get Sick. And that book was inspired actually by my own health challenges. I am a 4-time survivor of a pregnancy disorder called hyperemesis gravidarum. And my combined experiences with those 4 pregnancies were such great learning experiences. They were extremely difficult, but also taught me and my family so much. We decided to try to fit them all into a book, and that is When Mommies Get Sick. So it serves as a guide to help children understand not only what to expect, but also how to help when their mom gets sick. Because as we all know, everybody gets sick sometimes, including moms, and we don't get a day off.
Okay, wow, that is amazing. Tell us, for those of us that don't know, what is hyperemesis gravidarum? I hope I'm saying that right. Tell
Yes,
us
you
what
nailed
that
it.
disorder is. Okay.
So hyperemesis, in a nutshell, it's extreme nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. So it's different from morning sickness because it lasts all day long, and normally it lasts well into the second trimester and sometimes all the way up to birth. And so it's, not only marked by the extreme nausea and vomiting, but it's also marked by hypersalivation and starvation and, all the pain that comes with that, being unable to eat, but still trying to grow a child within you, and malnutrition. And some people experience extreme dental problems from all the vomiting. And, the list just goes on
So
and
it's
on.
several times a day, like you aren't able to keep any nutrition down at all?
Right. So for me, in my worst times, I was going 24 to 72 hours without anything to eat and usually with nothing to drink, because anything I put in my mouth would just come right back up, including ice chips and anything. Like my prenatal vitamin, it was even Gatorade, saltine chips. It all just would come right back up and aggravate the vomiting. So it it's horrible.
And that's solid for 9 months. I'm like sitting here with my
Yeah.
mouth open, like horrified.
Yeah, no, it was horrible. Like I'm not kidding you, and I say I would throw up 8 to 12 times a day every day, and of course, there are periods that are worse than others. I In my worst times, like I said, I would go the 24 to 72 hours with nothing to eat, but then by the end of it, I was able to eat more regularly, but I was still vomiting every day and only felt better after the baby was out.
And so was that the quote unquote cure? Does it go away when the baby is born?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say for
Wow.
the vast majority, I've heard a couple, outliers that continue to experience the nausea and vomiting through the newborn stage. But at least for me personally, as soon as the baby was delivered, the placenta was out, then all of a sudden it was like this light switch just went off, and I was finally hungry and finally able to stomach the idea of food.
Wow. I my first doctor with my very first baby 25 years ago at this point now, 20, well, anyway, he's almost 24, so whatever that is for the pregnancy. I would complain about little things, nothing like this, nothing. But, heartburn or whatever. And he was really old school and he was like, "Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. You know what the cure for that is? Having a baby." And I would get so mad. I was like, "You are not helpful." But actually, that is the cure for what happened to you. So
Yes, it is. It's a
hopefully,
miracle.
hopefully no doctor ever said that to you, though.
Well,
It was not great.
I had a couple that were a little less than sympathetic, but yeah,
So,
it's a
and there's
wild ride.
nothing to be done during the pregnancy for it.
Correct. So, I mean, there are different medications, and some medications work for some people. But for me, I tried every cocktail out there. I tried every combination of all the different medicines and all the different homeopathic remedies. I tried everything. And for me, I never could find anything that would fix it.
Okay, so it's one thing when it's your first baby, but you said you have four. So you're dealing with this while you have one, two, and three children to care for while you are trying to manage this illness. So obviously then there we have this topic of the book. There's no paid time off for momming. So what do you do? What tips do you have? I'm sure it's more than just a few tips here and there, but what were your strategies for function when you were so ill?
And really, it's something you have to take a day at a time because sometimes, especially with my first and second pregnancies, I really wasn't sure what to expect because I'd never heard of anybody getting this sick. And when you can't function as a mom, it just is so difficult. But looking back on the experiences, there are a couple different tiers to consider. Okay, this may be an imperfect analogy, but like say your house is beginning to flood. There are a couple different things to consider. So, like first is the immediate situation. So, what am I going to do with my kids? I am so violently ill today. What am I going to do with my kids? How am I going to address my other responsibilities such as like dinner, carpool, soccer practice, these kinds of things. And you're going to bring in a support system that's unique to the immediate situation. And then with the long term situation, in my case, I didn't get better and I knew I wasn't going to get better. So then, as those immediate needs were being taken care of, I had to look to the future like, okay, what are my long term scheduled options here? Like, what are my scheduled options for childcare, and what kind of game plan can I make with my support system, with my husband, with my healthcare provider? So just like as you're going through, if you were in a flooding situation, if you know the flood is coming, you're going to do things differently than if it just shows up at your door, right? And then but long term, it is messy and it is difficult, and there are different things you can do, but I mean in the end you really have to take it a day at a time and find what works for your family and what doesn't work for your family, and have a lot of patience, which is it's hard to come by, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, waiting for your body to work through this and for healthcare providers to help you with it. In this case, you did have sort of an end date, which is
Thank
nice
goodness.
for right. And we kind of do because we were also Jane Ann and I were talking about how this relates to lots of different sicknesses, whether you have a cold for the week or you have a long-term autoimmune disorder. All of these things create situations for moms where they're just not functioning the way they want. And especially for your situation, but most sicknesses are not in this way, but also trying to get your own nutrition taken care of can be difficult when you're not feeling good.
Right. And it's so difficult when, you're not only trying to work through all the suffering yourself, but you're also trying to find a way to make it okay for everybody else in the house. Because, I mean, you're not the only one affected by your sickness. And I think that's a weight that a lot of women can carry when we are not able to function at 100%, no matter how hard we're trying.
Right. And as much as we can divide tasks at home, there's certainly things, of course, it's like, well, my husband does this and I do this. I think there's a natural division of labor. But when you are a stay at home mom, the stay at home tasks tend to fall on you. And so continuing to divide those up and giving them over to your spouse or hiring them out can get to be kind of a challenge long term. Is that a strategy that you used to sort of hand off some of your at home tasks?
Definitely. And I think, there is a very real mental weight. Like, even if I'm not performing all the tasks, I still have to make sure they're being done. And so just trying to list those out was really helpful. And then I could set up expectations for my husband and for we're fortunate enough to live very close to both sets of grandparents. And so having them be very aware of the schedule and very aware of the things that needed done was extremely helpful and helps offload a little bit of that mental burden.
For sure. Because when you're asking other people to take care of a task, you also want them to take care of that mental burden. So when you ask someone, hey, I need for you to take over the laundry, you don't mean when I tell you to do the laundry, then go do the laundry. You mean also deciding when the laundry needs to be done, like the mental burden of noticing that the laundry needs to be done and then doing it. So it's one thing just for them to do the task physically, but it's a whole nother thing to ask someone to take over also the thinking about it, which is, I think, takes a huge burden off of that person that's not feeling well.
Definitely.
So it gets tricky though, because a lot of times we define our role as a mom by doing all of the mom stuff, which I've noticed quite a bit of this actually in social media lately. And maybe it's just because I'm kind of cued into it, but I believe being a mom is a relationship and not a task list. But we feel like still as women that it is a task list, that it is I'm the mom and so I am the taxi, and we see these lists of things that if you needed to replace me, you'd have to hire a taxi and a nurse and a cook and all of these things. And so we think, oh well, that is what it means to be a mom. What it means to be a mom is to have a relationship. But how do you reconcile that when you're not doing all of those tasks that we've become associated with being a mom?
That is something I really, really struggled with during my pregnancies. And just to be completely honest, it was really hard because, I mean, there are those messages out there that, like, you're more than just the things you do. But to really believe it is a completely different hurdle. Or I don't know, for lack of a better word, it's just a
Yeah.
completely different ball game.
It's
And
total it's true. And by the way, I don't like it's not like I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm all in. I read it once and I just believe that 100%." I just feel like it's an option to believe it, but we don't yet. So now what? What do we do until then?
right. Well, for me, it really came down to hitting rock bottom. In this pregnancy with my fourth child, I was bedridden for months. I mean, I could not sit up in my bed without vomiting. And so, at first my kids would come into my room and ask for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, ask for permission to do this or permission to do that, and just regular things. And I had to redirect them to go ask dad, go ask grandma. And then after a while, they stopped coming and asking me. And I began to have to actively fight
Oh,
against these thoughts of, I am so worthless right now. And no one really needs me. Everyone is doing just fine without me. What is the point of my role as a mom when any functional adult can make just as good a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as I can? It was
Mm.
so hard to fight
Mhm.
those thoughts. But at the same time, those thoughts didn't sit right. They just didn't feel like the truth. So I began to ask myself, what is my role? And what does it mean to be their mother when I can't do those mom things? And what I landed on was this idea that no matter what I can and can't do for my children, because those things can change, what I can and can't do fluctuates day by day. But who I am as their mother is forever. And no matter what state I'm in, that will always matter. And that will always be unique to my relationship with those children. Who you are is the most important thing. And what you can do is just a bonus.
Oh,
So
I
it took
love
a
that.
lot of mental work to come to that conclusion, but that sat right with me.
That is so good. Such a good thought to go to. And I'm all about the thoughts and intentional thinking, so I love that you landed on a thought that really helped you to get through this time, because sometimes that's all we have is our brains when
Yes.
our bodies are not functioning the way we want. And sometimes our brains follow and we start getting into that spiraling where you're like, why am I what's the point, any functioning adult? And you were able to really come around to a thought that helped you there.
Yeah, and another thing that really helped me was an example of a friend of mine. We were co-workers several years ago, and I actually included her in the illustrations in my book. And unfortunately, early on in her mothering journey, she ended up developing cancer. And
Mm.
so she had, a little toddler at home and this brand new baby, and she's going through chemotherapy. And she was and continues to be, now that she's unfortunately passed on, she is such a beautiful example of this principle. I mean, I watched her journey just over social media, and she was always trying to make the most of every minute. And she continues to have an impact and touch her children's lives. And attending to their physical needs isn't even part of the picture anymore. And yet she
Mhm.
continues to be a completely irreplaceable role in their lives.
Yeah, because we have relationships exist in our brains, which means those children still have a relationship with her, even if she's not physically here on earth.
Right. And why can't that be the case with us?
Sure.
So,
Even if we're just stuck in bed, they can still have that relationship.
right.
What kinds of things did you do to continue to cultivate that when you weren't even able to sit up?
So a big part of that was observation. So I was watching, because really that's all I could do while I was laying in my bed, but I was watching the different ways that my kids were reaching out to me. And it's like, am I accepting their little gestures? And what are they doing? And I tried to follow their example. I really tried to observe the ways that they were reaching out to me. So it was, they would come into my room and bring quiet toys and just play next to my bed as quiet as they could. And, just poking their little heads in the door and waving, or, um,
Aw, so sweet.
yeah, or making little notes. And just a little plug in here for anybody who may end up being part of somebody else's support system. I am so grateful that my mother and my mother-in-law were so good at redirecting my kids to try to connect with me. So as they were doing
Oh,
arts and
interesting.
crafts, then they would say, "Hey, why don't you make your mom a little card?" Or, "Do you want to write her a note?" Doing things that helped connect us, even though I couldn't do a whole lot. So, I mean, cultivating that connection, I think, again, it was observing what they were doing and appreciating that on a deeper level, and then trying to mirror that back to them. And for a time I was too sick to write them notes, but then when they would come in, I would say, "Hey, I was thinking about you. These are the things I was thinking about. I was thinking about the day you were born and how much joy that brought me, or I was thinking about this sweet thing you did." And so we worked a lot off of memories together, and things that were unique to our relationship.
So I can't help but thinking, being that I am highly focused on food and in my coaching, so many of my clients struggle with not eating when other people are eating as a form of celebration or as a form of connection. And what's striking me here is that you had zero connection with your children, with your spouse, with anyone around food during this time. And not just because you couldn't like eat it, but it just wasn't part of your life at that point. And you still cultivated connection. And obviously this is like a drastic situation. Like it's not the same as just choosing not to have it. But I'm just noticing that when I tell my clients, it's more about the people. When you go out for girls' night, it's about the girls that you're with more than it's about what you order. I don't care what you order. It doesn't matter nearly as much because they're always sure like if they're ordering dessert, I should order dessert. It should all be the same. They're going to think this, they're going to think that. And so they think that food has everything to do with the relationship. And I just think it's fascinating that food had zero to do with your relationships. And there was tons of connection happening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was actually surprising to me too because we do find so much connection, and sometimes we think what we bring to the table has to be food, but as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
what we have to bring to the table is so much more than that. It's shared experience, and it's shared relationship, and commonality in so much more than just what we're eating.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as this is all happening and you're finding these new mantras and how to connect, underlying, you're probably still dealing with what we call mom guilt. Everyone knows what that means. And
Yeah.
it's just basically, I mean, I kind of define it as just never doing enough. It's never doing enough combined with I probably messed them up. How was that for you during this time? How did you deal with that? Does it play a role here at all for you?
Oh, it plays a huge role. And what a plague. When I think of the word mom guilt, the feeling that courses through my body is just like, oh. I mean, it is such a force, and so many of us keep it around like it's a permanent part of the parenting package. Like if I'm not feeling mom guilt, I must be doing something wrong, even though the mom guilt makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. It feels like a part of the package.
Well, it's like having to hate ourselves thin. You think like, oh,
Right.
if I don't hate my body enough, then I won't be motivated. You think like, well, if I don't feel bad that I'm not doing it right, I won't be motivated to do it better.
Right.
And so I think we think that the guilt is necessary in order for us to do things better and to keep improving in our parenting skills. If we think that we're doing a good job, then we won't want to improve or continue to connect. And obviously that when we're saying it out loud, it sounds completely wrong, but when your brain says it somehow is very convincing.
Yes, it is. Oh, that siren call. And it's interesting that you phrase it that way because I personally I don't believe that all guilt is bad and not all mom guilt is bad. I there are a couple different types of guilt here. There's one type of guilt that stems from an awareness of ourselves, and it can be empowering, motivating, and encourage progress. And I think that's the kind that we're trying to keep a hold of. And it's more of a gentle
Right.
nag.
The kind that just says, "Oh, hey, this doesn't align."
Right. Like, oh, I didn't
Yeah.
like how that came out. Maybe I can have a do over. I
Yeah.
yelled at my kid. I'm going to go say sorry and ask for a do over. It's
Perfect.
a gentle nag, and it focuses on something that you could do. Like, I could go apologize. I could fill in the blank. But the other kind of guilt that I'd venture to say we are all too familiar with is the type of guilt that stems from a criticism of ourselves or contempt for ourselves. And this kind of
Mm.
guilt feels prickly, it feels heavy, it's suffocating, it's belittling, and it comes from shame and regret and comparison and leaves us feeling more or less paralyzed. It focuses on all the shoulds, so including things you may or may not even have any control over. So, like in my
Mm.
case, I should be making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I should be taking my kids to school, but that wasn't in the realm of my control. And it can be very damaging. And you can't just will yourself back to 100% when life throws a curveball. Like there are some things that happen that you can prepare all you want and you can have the best of intentions, but things are still going to happen, and that kind of guilt just serves no one. It doesn't serve yourself, it doesn't serve your spouse or your children. And so if the mom guilt you're experiencing is coupled with one positive thing you could do, then that's fantastic. But if the mom guilt that you feel has you feeling crushed under the weight of a million different shoulds, it has no place in your heart or your home. And I
Mhm.
think by being aware of the type of guilt we're experiencing during times of illness, whether it be physical or mental illness, we can take a stand to only allow those bits of guilt that build rather than destroy.
Perfect. That is so helpful. And I think when we're just stuck in that guilt that leads down into shame, that's where we want to really say, oh, whoa. Because if you've heard of the definitions where guilt says, hey, you've just done something wrong, this doesn't align with your values, that can be helpful, as opposed to shame, which says you are wrong
Right.
as a person. And that's, I think, where we call it mom guilt, but it's probably more like mom shame. So I see what you're saying. Like, definitely there's some forms of guilt that are helpful because it's like, hey there. It's just like a little red flag. As you're talking about this mom guilt, it reminds me of a quote I've seen kind of circulating around on Instagram. It's from Dr. Amen. And he said, my mental health really changed when I stopped asking myself, why am I so lazy? And started asking, why does my body need so much rest right now? And I think this is so applicable with what we're talking about, that sometimes we need to respond to what our body needs, and don't name call yourself about it, because that's going to lead to that shame.
Right. And, again, trying to get a real handle on what is within your control and what isn't, because it's not productive to beat yourself up over those things that you can't control. And that's, I think, where a lot of the name calling comes in, and, that criticism.
Getting out of this mom guilt and mom stuff just requires a lot of creativity, because that's definitely what I'm noticing here with your situation is you had to be very creative to continue to cultivate your relationships, to continue to create connection, a lot of creativity. And one of the emotions I notice that helps me with creativity is curiosity. And I know this is a favorite for you as well, is I love to generate curiosity because I just think it leads to so much creativity. It also just opens up your brain a lot. I think curiosity does. And this is genuine curiosity, not like, what in the world is wrong with that person? But I wonder what is happening in their day. And I do practice this emotion all the time. But what is your favorite way to cultivate curiosity? And do you find that to increase your joy as well?
Yeah. So cultivating curiosity, I found, is all about, like you were saying, the questions that ping pong around in our minds. So in my case, rather than asking why, I had to rephrase and ask what. So instead of, why is this medicine not working? Why am I so sick when everyone else is glowing in their pregnancies? I could ask, okay, what have I not tried yet? What is here for me to learn? What does this experience have to offer me in terms of growth? And, it boils down to creative problem solving. Albert Einstein has this fantastic quote that I love. It says, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And so
Mm,
looking at any type of situation as a potential opportunity can cultivate a lot of curiosity. I also learned there is so much power in submission. So accepting the things that we can't control and then looking around and asking, what is here? What opportunities exist in this space? And for me, that ended up being writing and illustrating my book, because creating brings me so much joy. And so finding
mm,
something that I could create while I was stuck in bed for so long was life giving. And at first, I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't even sit up in bed. And so I had to create it mentally. And then as I got a little stronger, I was able to put pen to paper and then put paintbrush to paper and create the whole book. And I ended up doing the whole thing, all of the illustrations and all of the writing. And I had it finished just before my daughter was born. And
and which pregnancy was that?
this was my most recent, my fourth child.
Okay. Okay.
And so I don't know, I had to take a long, hard look at what I love and what brought me joy, and then tried to see if there was a way to incorporate that in the place where I was. So, like working within the boundaries I was given, there is, I mean, I would say arguably, there usually is wiggle space to incorporate something that you love in whatever space you're in. So finding a way to incorporate the things I love within the boundaries I was given. So when it comes to finding joy, most things are temporary. Like we're not always going to find a forever solution. Like I'm not going to quit my stay-at-home mom job to become a full-time artist or writer. But that gave me a lot of joy in that temporary situation. And so just because something isn't going to necessarily last as a forever solution, we can't let that frustrate us, because it doesn't matter if something brought you joy for 5 minutes or 5 years. Like sometimes holding on to the memory of something that brought you joy can last, can hold you over for a long time. And I'm sure you've run into this before. There's something called a negativity bias, where
Yeah.
the brain space that we give the things that harm us or make us feel bad, we give a lot of brain space to those things and a lot of memory space. And,
Hmm.
one 5 minute negative encounter we can hang on to for years. But one 5 minute
Yeah.
positive encounter, how long does that really last in our brains?
It's just such a bummer too. I mean, I know why it's there. It's to keep us alive because good things don't kill us. And so, you know, evolutionarily, we paid attention to the negative things. I teach that we really experience life as 50-50. About half the time we have positive emotion, about half the time we have negative emotion. But unfortunately, our brain thinks it's somewhere more like 70-30, where about 70% of the time it's negative because of that negativity bias, because we give more weight to the negative things that happen. And so, one bad thing happens in the day and you're like, well, that day's shot. And the truth is it was just one thing. So yeah, negativity bias is really a challenge, I think, for humans just to get to the natural state of 50-50.
Right. And I mean, I would argue that even when you're in a very intense season of suffering with, if it's a chronic illness, if it's, pregnancy related, if it's, even a 24-hour cold, you know, the brain has such power to make it a positive experience or a negative experience. And although there will be negativity there, if we can be aware of our brain's tendency to hang on to the negative and maybe turn it off for a while and try to remember the positive, it can hold you through for a really long time. A couple other joy tips that I love, especially during seasons of suffering, is comparison is the thief of joy. So for me,
Hmm.
like comparing my pregnancy to other people's pregnancies robbed me of joy because mine
Yeah,
was
I bet.
so hard. And it's the same. You do a lot of body image coaching and helping with health and wellness, and like comparing your body to other people's bodies will rob you of your joy of the progress that you've made. And
Absolutely.
so if comparison is the thief of joy, guilt is the crusher of joy. And
Mm,
on the flip side, curiosity and creativity are catalysts of joy. Um, so to cultivate the curiosity and creativity, trying something new can be really helpful. Like for me, writing and illustrating the book was something new and it brought me a lot
mhm.
of joy, but you have to be okay being a beginner, and you have to be okay not, not being excellent at it. It doesn't rob you of the joy of trying and finding ways.
Well, I've seen your book and it's adorable, so I'm pretty sure it's excellent.
Well, thank you. I really, really gave it all I had. I have actually been painting for as long as I can remember. Ever since I could hold a paintbrush, I have been painting, and I've always wanted to write a children's book. So this was a dream come true, out of a very unexpected place. But, speaking of that, the one of the reasons I decided to take the leap and write the book was because I really believe that helping other people can bring us joy. And my purpose in creating the book was to help other people in similar situations where, when you experience maternal health problem, or like, if mom gets sick, it affects the whole family. It's a whole family situation that everybody's affected. And so in writing the book, I was hoping to give families a resource to be able to hold on to and look at and say, okay, there are things we can be aware of, and there are ways we can help, and here's what we can do to support mom. And then actually seeing the book come to life and holding it in my hands and seeing other people hold it in their hands, and um, seeing it make a positive impact in their family has been indescribably rewarding. I mean, I can't even tell you in adequate words what that feels like to have somebody else read my book and then say, hey, this helped me when I was struggling during my pregnancy. It's just such a transcendent experience. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's,
Well, I can see it on your face. I don't provide a video with my interviews, but I have Jayne Ann on video and I can just see the joy on her face, the way she's explaining this, it's like no words can even describe what she's feeling right now.
Thank you. And, it truly is amazing what we are capable of when we're pushed to our absolute limits. And I think moms are incredible. Every single mom is a warrior in her own right,
Mhm.
because the experiences that we go through and the hardships that we overcome, all while caring for children, is just so impressive. It is so inspiring. And I really think that we don't give ourselves enough credit. And if any mom out there ever needs a cheerleader, I am here for that. I just so admire the strength and resilience that can come out of such difficult situations.
Yeah. That's just beautiful. And I hope that we all support one another in our mothering and in our goals and in the ways we want to improve ourselves and those accomplishments and supporting these kinds of if you have friends that are writing books or if you have friends that are building businesses, like support them and show them that you care, because little kids, they're not that great at that. They're not that great at being like, you're doing a really good job, mom. So it's kind of up to us as other moms to be like, hey, mom, you're doing a good job.
Absolutely. Yes, they're
Yeah.
working on that words of affirmation thing, but it's it's a learning process for sure.
Okay. Any last words of wisdom for us, Jane Ann? Anything else that you want to add?
So, one final thing I would love to add is this idea of keeping an I did list rather than a to do list. Because when
Love
you
it.
are sick and you really have to take a step back from your usual list of things that you accomplished during the day, it can really weigh on you just how little you're able to do. And keeping an I did list really helps you focus on those things that you did. Everything that you do accomplish by the end of the day, that's forward momentum. That counts for something. And any time that you've created or learned or accomplished anything by the end of whatever experience, that forward momentum is worth acknowledging. And I think especially in the cases when you're being held back by either, something is off physically, something is off mentally, something is off in, just your exterior situation, that forward momentum is always worth acknowledging. And I just can't say enough about that.
I was actually today with a client, we were talking about an accomplishment log, which is a similar thing. It was more of a lifetime accomplishment log when just as a tool to build self confidence. And I told her sometimes I just do this on the micro level when in the morning, if I feel like, oh, sometimes my brain wants to tell me, like, you sure haven't accomplished anything today. Look at you just now getting in the shower. And so I will do this. I'm like, well, I got up at this time. I made 2 lunches for teenage girls. And sometimes I list on that, like, I supported them this morning. I talked to them this morning before they left for school. Like, I list that out. And I made the bed. I fed the dog. Like, all the little things, they can go on that list because someone has to do them. And in the case of like seeing your kids off to school, it's because you want to do them. They
Right.
could, my girls are teenagers and the older one drives. So they could get themselves to school by themselves. Like they don't actually need me, but I want to. And so I love that accomplishment too. And I want to list those things of the things, not just that I have to do, but the things I want to do.
Right. And, those little things that you wouldn't necessarily put on a to do list, like, connecting with your kids right before school and taking them to school and making that extra effort. You wouldn't necessarily write that down on a to do list, but like that is something that you did that really will make an impact.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't ever write that I don't even write down make lunches on a to do list because it just happens. But
Right.
I do write it on a I did list. I love that. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing. Tell us how people can connect with you, learn more about what you do, anything that you want to offer to the listeners.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm on Instagram at momming on purpose. That's MOMMING on purpose. And my blog is life-onpurpose.com. And I've got a lot of articles on there about hyperemesis and also just intentional parenting and other tips and tricks for moms. And I actually would love to offer 50% off of a book kit for any of your listeners who may be interested. So what comes in this
Oh,
kit,
so nice.
yeah, and what comes in this kit is a signed copy of the book with a little note of encouragement for me and coloring pages and bookmarks for the kids. And I'm happy to send that anywhere in the world. And and like I said, I'm happy to do it for 50% off for your listeners. And that's for if you'd like me to send a copy to you, to a friend or a family member, or even if you'd be interested in sponsoring one. I actually send out these kits pretty regularly to other women who are struggling with hyperemesis and have kids at home
Oh,
because
wow.
I know firsthand any little spark of something positive that happens in a day makes a huge difference. I mean, no book is going to cure hyperemesis or chronic illness or whatever the case may be, but just that little bit of support can really go a long way.
Okay, perfect. I love that. We'll have all those links on how to do that in the show notes. So, the links to her blog and Instagram and directions for how to get that book will all be in the show notes. So, go there. So, just really appreciate Jayne Ann. Thanks again so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been such a great experience. And I so appreciate all that you do for moms and for other women to help support and help other people live their life on purpose.
I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jayne Ann and that you go check her out. If anything that we discussed resonated with you about creating curiosity and connection, but you're not really sure how a person might actually create these feelings in your own body, remember that your thoughts create your feelings, and that's where you want to start. Find the thought that creates the feelings you want. If it's curiosity, just start with wondering. Any statement that starts with I wonder or I wonder if. But you can also schedule a free strategy session with me to learn more of this type of coaching. And I always say the best way to know if coaching is going to work for you is to actually try some coaching. The link for my calendar is in the show notes, and I will talk to you next week. Hey, thanks for listening today. If you're ready to get some personalized coaching from me, I'd encourage you to schedule a free strategy session. Visit www.wellwithlisa.as.me, or it's easier just to find that link in the show notes. We'll talk about where you currently are with your weight loss goals, and I'll give you some actionable tools you can start implementing right away. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they're released. And if you're learning something new and enjoying the podcast, I'd love for you to leave me a 5-star rating and a review. Thanks again for joining me, Lisa Salisbury, in this episode of Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well.